And welcome everyone to another session in the 11th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Conference. It is presented by Northeastern State University in lovely Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Session today is one of the 60 sessions we have to Friday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Don't forget, all of our sessions are closed caption. To view the captions, simply click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. And Michelle is she has done every session for us and is doing a great job. Her fingers apparently never get tired. Today's session is learning styles, myth or fact. Our presenter is Jennifer Quinlan, who's the language curriculum manager for the Missionary Training Center at Brigham Young University. That sounds interesting. Also, our co-presenter is Carolyn Andrews, the administrator for BYU Online and an academic consultant for blended and online learning for the university. So, without further ado, let me turn it over to Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Bob. I am really excited to be here, and I'm hoping that Carolyn will jump in here shortly, but she had a couple of complications arise, so we're not sure that she'll be able to jump in. But first of all, I'd love to get a feel for who is in our audience today, who's participating with us today. So I don't know if we can do how many of you are teachers? Bill's an instructor. What else do we have out there? Administrators, if you're high school or secondary ed, versus higher ed if you're, okay, online faculty, great, instructor and admin. I think that's a common pairing, it seems like, in a lot of universities. Counselor and online instructor. Oh, and we've got an instructional designer with us today too, great. So how many of you are into learning styles? Feel like there's something there when people say learning styles. Okay, we've got a little mixed bag. I'm gonna pick on Alan. He said, meh, I'd like to know. Are you one of those people who's thinking, what's all the hype about learning styles? Anyone else? Kim says her perspective is changing. That's interesting. So some of the faculty that I've worked with, I've collaborated on online learning and especially language education online and blended. Carolyn and I have worked with people from a lot of universities across the US as well as Canada and Europe. And I think there's a lot of people looking for a clear-cut way to differentiate. And in some circles, they feel like learning styles could be that way. Just looking through some of your comments here. Yeah. What do you think? Does it seem like the hype out there is like, oh, learning styles is the way to be able to differentiate effectively? What are things that come to mind when you think of learning styles? Go ahead in the chat, or certainly you can enable your mics too. I don't know, Bob, if participants can have mic rights or not, but comfort zone thing. Interesting, Michelle. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Vance says part of the cognitive development stages. Well, let's dig in a little bit on this and let's see what you think. So I've learned a little bit about you and kind of some of your thinking. Carolyn and I both work at Brigham Young University. We've been there for a number of years. And currently in my role, I manage BYU's lab school. So we train volunteer missionaries in language learning specifically. And we do that in a combination of face-to-face and some technology enhanced as well as online and blended training. So Carolyn and I have been working together for a long time in online and blended learning. And we're really excited to be with you today and kind of talk about this notion of learning styles. This is something that comes up a lot, especially for those of you who are kind of veterans in the online space. You know that this comes up a lot when they say, oh, an online course that maybe is too text heavy, so you're isolating your visual, your auditory learners, or something that has so much media and now you're isolating your visual learners, or something like that, right? So this is what we're hopefully going to get to today. This is what I hope we can tackle. That at the end of our session here today, you'll feel like you can think and talk critically about learning styles theories, and also identify ways to implement learner readiness strategies to build self-efficacy among our students. So I appreciate what Dr. Dunham said here about it's important to know about learning styles when designing online courses. When I first started as an instructional designer for BYU's independent study arm, they serve about 100,000 students online every year. And when I started as an instructional designer with them, not quite a decade ago, this was a big topic of discussion. We've got to know learning styles and the needs of our students in terms of their learning styles when we design online courses, so that we design to those styles. That was kind of the mentality. How many of you are in environments where this is kind of the thinking as well, that knowing those learning styles should inform our course design? I see Ramona here too says they can inform the learner or facilitator of an effective way of studying or facilitating. So maybe this is common in your environments, this kind of thought. Well, let's just kind of do a quick overview of what are kind of the mainstream, I guess, learning styles. So we've got the visual learner. So this is the sense that you know, we're stimulated by the visual sense. Oral learners, so this is one that comes up a lot with music. The verbal learners, who are stimulated by the Broca's and Wernicke areas of the brain. I see this format in the slideshow kind of got wonky there, but the physical, where we're talking about the back of the frontal lobe. So this is tied to a lot of physical movement. You hear about physical learning styles a lot in, for example, occupational therapy environments in elementary schools particularly. This seems to come up a lot. Logical, so obviously that part of our parietal lobes that drives our logical thinking. The social, which comes from the part of the brain that handles our social activities. And then, of course, solitary, where we've got all of these parts of the brain that are active with this style of learning. So these are kind of talking about theories that tie to what parts of the brain are stimulated for these types of learners or this type of learning style, right? So let's find out what your learning style is. Let me see if I can copy and paste this link into, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me paste the link into the chat, and then you all can take the quick quiz and see what kind of learning style this says you are. This is from Education Planner. I don't know if any of you have used this before. A lot of secondary ed professionals use resources on this website. So go ahead and click on that link, and let's find out what your learning style is. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Once you have your result, if you don't mind popping it in the chat, if you're comfortable sharing that, we'll just see what kind of learners we have in our audience today. Okay, I'll give you just another minute here, then we'll onward and upward, keep pushing forward here. Okay, I'll bring you back to the group. Alyssa, thanks for sharing. Others, if you're comfortable sharing, please feel free. I love the comments here from Kim and Ramona about feeling like maybe there are different learning styles at different times or on different subjects. So already you're getting a sense for what might happen if, as an instructor, you give a learning styles quiz to your students to try to understand, okay, what are the learning styles of the population that I'm serving here? And now, how much room does that survey give for maybe I'm this type of a learner in these types of activities, or depending on the resources I have, that impacts the type of learner I am. You can see how there might be a trap here a little bit, right? So what does it really mean, your learning style? Sorry, my computer's kind of jumping around here. My mouse kind of freaked out. So what does this really mean? What is your learning style? If you take a quiz, what does your learning style really mean? Oh, look at Kim's. Pretty diverse here. So tell me what you think. Are learning styles mutually exclusive? If you're primarily a tactile learner like Kim, does that mean that you're just not going to learn as well if, oh, actually Kim's primarily visual. Does it mean that you're not going to learn as well then if you engage material in your coursework that requires something else? Bill says not mutually exclusive. Others, Kim sees it as a preference. Yeah, here's a case in point. So if you're an auditory learner, I saw several of you there range pretty high on the auditory. Few of you looked like more auditory. So then if you're an auditory learner, are you at risk of avoiding reading or any type of visual learning, or do you even exclude it from your learning altogether? This is probably not very likely that auditory learners are like, and therefore I don't read because I just can't learn that way. Probably you're still gonna read, right? Here's another example, visual learners. If you read all about Beethoven's Symphony No. 5, you learn the notes, the history, the reasons it's so famous, you acquire all this information about Symphony No. 5 visually because you respond well to that. What happens then when you hear it? So this is kind of getting at the concept of, sometimes with learning styles, we kind of end up pigeonholing or targeting a specific type of learning at the risk of a different approach that might be equally rich and valuable. So for example, if you say, well, I've got a lot of visual learners, so in music class, when I'm teaching about Beethoven and the impact of his Symphony No. 5, I'm going to give a lot of visual resources. And then I eschew auditory learning because I know I've got all these visual learners in my class. I might be sacrificing really the learning experience for my learners, right? So Kim, I like your comment that thinking about learning styles can add to the learning. And hopefully that is true, and that we don't inadvertently then limit the learning because we start trying to target a specific learning style. So let me jump to this other screen here. BYU developed a learner readiness survey. And I want you to think about that in relation to learning styles. So are you still seeing my screen here? You guys see the BYU survey here? Great. This is our learner readiness survey. So every student who, oh, Candy, I appreciate your comment too, learning a lot from accommodating students with disabilities. Definitely. And I think there's real value there. And obviously we have to pay a lot of attention to accommodating disabilities, notably in distance learning environments. So at BYU, all students who take an online course take this learner readiness survey first. And this is, we're trying to perceive especially their online learner readiness and some nuances that might help prepare them for success in an online learning environment. So I'm just gonna kind of on a high level go through. So we asked them their previous experience. We asked them if they're going to have a job. So obviously jobs, that's probably a valuable question to ask face-to-face students too, but if they're a parent. So at BYU, we do have an unusually high percentage of our students who are married and have children already, even in their undergraduate. So that is a demand on time and also maybe ability to focus if they're doing their online learning in their home environment, whether they're currently an athlete. So we're looking at possible things that are interacting with their readiness to be an online learner, things that might compete for their time. And then the type of devices. Okay, that's pretty high level stuff. Then we talk about their values. Is their GPA important in reaching their goals, completing their degree, what they hope to gain from their education? And then we have a series of questions that talk about, that kind of get at things that are common problems in online learners, like understanding the correlation between the effort that they put into their classes and how well they do in them. So this kind of gets at their mentality about engagement and effort in their learning. And then these measure perceived control for education. So we've got these little headers at each section of our learner readiness survey that help students understand kind of what we're getting at with these questions and kind of also help educate them a little bit. So for example, students who perceive that they are in control of their success may have a mindset that helps them adjust their behaviors to their situation. Students who perceive that external forces have greater control may not think about changing their behavior to adjust the situation. And as a result, they may have poorer outcomes. I think this is actually really valuable for online or face-to-face, understanding that they have control over their situation and control over their learning. Then we have a series of questions that asks about self-regulation, regulating their thoughts and behaviors in order to complete their coursework. And then we kind of contextualize, this is why we're asking you this, because you're about to engage in an online course or a series of online courses. These tasks are essential for independent online learners. More questions, specific skills that might be important for their coursework. So active communication, ability to give and receive feedback. I think a lot of us use discussion boards or have forums where we're asking students to have discussions, even in the online environment, right? Notably in the online environment, I feel like we can foster really thoughtful and meaningful discussion, but we want learners to recognize there's a skill to that. Communicating with their instructor, clearly asking questions, being able to express opinions respectfully. Then we've got a series of questions that asks how well they communicate with classmates, group members, instructors. Again, tackling that kind of communication thing. You're probably noticing that nowhere here have we said, oh, are you more of a visual person or more of an auditory person or more of a tactile person? Because what we're really trying to tackle here are skills that prepare the learners for the type of learning experience they're going to have. So this is a question that cycles around, especially among instructional designers and some of our faculty frequently. Do learning styles predict ability to learn online? And we try to reframe that as, instead of kind of being pigeonholed by a learning style predicting ability to learn, let's think about learner readiness. And does that predict ability to effectively learn online? So let me talk a little bit about the literature. Those of you who are kind of meh about learning styles or thinking about like, you know, what's all the hype, some of this might resonate with you. And for those who are like, there's a lot to be said about learning styles, this might challenge some of your assumptions. So let's go there. So Reiner and Willingham, Dan Willingham, of course, is famous for essentially saying learning styles is not a real thing, quote unquote. So they've got a lot of research that talks about learning styles are not indicators, and they don't indicate ability, they don't indicate interests, and they don't indicate background knowledge. And those are three things that are really important to position a learner for success. And so they kind of take the tack of learning styles aren't what predict a learner being successful, actually. Their ability, their interests, and their background knowledge are what predict that. And learning styles don't indicate those things. So Phil Newton says one of the harms of adopting hypotheses surrounding learning styles is that you pigeonhole and that you actually might divert resources. So he cites some examples in university and secondary ed settings where administrations actually diverted resources to a specific intervention to target specific types of learning styles, which in fact were resources that probably should have been spent on improving their pedagogy in general or providing access to learning materials that support their curricular programs. So it kind of became like this sideshow at the circus that pulled away valuable resources into something that didn't have a high return on investment, instead of focusing resources on preparing learners and positioning them for success. Hood talks about problems. Hood calls learning styles a neuromyth, and just talks about that there's a lack of framework for learning styles. So we can't really, in a scientific approach, we can't really say this is the framework that suggests all of the claims that have been made about learning styles. There's not a scientific framework for it. Also, that the assumption of there's kind of this assumption of a fixed learning style, such as, some of you were tactile, visual, and auditory, almost equally spread. But there's this assumption with learning styles that that's fixed and that it doesn't develop or evolve or change. And sometimes when people say, oh, well, I'm an auditory learner, it actually becomes an impediment to their ability to adapt and their ability to apply themselves. So one of the big things Hood talks about is just that when learners take a learning style label, or they assume this label, they then say, I'll just never be good at science because there's so much tactile stuff, and I'm just not a tactile learner. Doing all those experiments, it just doesn't work for me. And therefore they limit their application in that coursework or that type of environment that seems to not be their style. And they also lose out on developing the skill of being able to adapt, which is maybe part of what we hope university students especially, but also secondary and elementary as well, that students would develop as part of their experience in education. So now let's talk a little bit about learner readiness, what the literature says about that. So Hung talks about 5 dimensions of the online learning readiness scale. And I think these are really interesting kind of undercurrents. Self-directed learning, a motivation, their self-efficacy on the computer or in an internet environment, learner control, and their ability to communicate online, their self-efficacy in online communication. So in 2015, there's this big lit review about learner readiness. And they talked about learner readiness as a critical element to successful learning in online environments. Notably, skills and attitudes were the most significant factors in this huge lit review that they did. That's what came out, that skills and attitudes were the most significant factors, not learning styles. However, giving a label of learning styles can impact the attitudes or the willingness to develop skills. So there's also this impact in terms of self-regulation. Learning styles theory kind of suggests an absence of self-regulation. Well, I'm this way, or I have this kind of preference, and it kind of excuses self-regulation or the ability to say, I prefer auditory learning, but I'm really able to learn in any environment as long as it's as long as it's a topic that's interesting to me, or something that I recognize is valuable for my development or my understanding. On the flip side, learner readiness is kind of focused more on identifying key factors that enable self-regulation. So learner readiness is all about, we want to turn on and support your self-regulation, whereas learning styles tends to, the result tends to be more like there is no self-regulation, essentially. That said, I frequently run into faculty who say, but learning styles impact someone's ability to self-regulate because of their preference or kind of what they tend to gravitate toward or what they think they're better at. So let's talk a little bit about self-regulation. Zimmerman and Shunk talk about self-regulation as the ability to effectively engage in your own learning process, metacognitively, motivationally, and behaviorally. So you've got the self kind of reflection, you've got the motivation, you see now that's kind of come up in 3 different frames of thought here, and the behavioral element. An active and constructivist process, this is Pintrich talks about self-regulation as the constructivist process. So you're attempting to monitor, regulate, control your cognition, your motivation, and your behaviors after setting goals for learning. And that these are guided and restricted by your own goals and the learning environment you're in. Whip and Chiarelli talked about self-regulation as a set of strategies that significantly affect your learning. Pretty kind of broad, larger perspective there. And then you've got this research that talks about self-regulation as goal setting, using effective strategies to regulate, coding and repeating information, and monitoring your own performance, asking for help when needed, having confidence in your own skills. And that specifically, they talk about skills beyond what you thought you had. So having confidence in your own skills, not the skills that I have today at the start of the class, but also the skills that I believe I can achieve because of these goals I've set. And finally, a learner who can self-regulate is organized, as careful planning, makes keen observations and assessments. So that kind of gives some skeleton or maybe some meat, I don't know, behind the thought of learner readiness, positioning learners to develop self-regulation, empowering them to self-regulate, whereas learning styles tends to kind of justify them from not self-regulating, in fact. I don't know how many of you have had students who have said like, oh, this course was so text heavy and I'm just not a visual learner and that's why I didn't do well in this course. I've encountered that several times in online courses that I've taught where the learning styles concept actually became a justification for not self-regulating. So Nuttall talks about 6 key aspects of self-regulation. There's the motive, the methods of learning, the time, so their ability to effectively use time, their physical environment, so do I learn better in an environment that's really quiet and no one else is around, or an environment where there's a lot of activity going on, it's just keeping me stimulated. Likewise with the social environment, do I learn well with others, so kind of capitalizing on the knowledge and the interaction with other people to help foster my learning. and then their performance and ability to monitor the effectiveness of their learning. So part of that self-regulation concept is knowing about yourself. Do I learn well in a quiet environment or a busy environment? Do I learn well at midnight or at 10 a.m.? I'm going to take classes based on what I know about myself and what I can regulate in myself. So if learners focus only on their learning style, they might completely miss kind of the complexity and depth here in their self-regulation. You've probably seen this visual, there's another one, but kind of the concept of the cyclic phase of self-regulation. It's a concept of development. So earlier I talked about one of the arguments against learning styles is that it can be limiting, or you think that it's static and that you're always going to be a tactile learner, whatever. So here there's kind of the concept in self-regulated learning of there's the forethought or the planning, and you can see these elements here in that stage, like there's some goal setting, there's some strategic planning, thinking about their self-motivation beliefs and what they expect the outcomes to be, the intrinsic value of engaging in this, their kind of orientation towards their learning goals. Then there's the performance stage. So developing self-control. They're using self-instruction when they're reading materials or practicing materials. They're focusing, they're using specific strategies as they engage in these tasks and practice activities, and observing themselves maybe too, right? And then this reflection stage, evaluation. Thinking about, am I satisfied with what happened here? Maybe I'm not adaptive enough. Maybe there's some real affect or emotional barriers there. Here's another way of looking at the self-regulated learning process: planning, practicing, and then evaluating. Again, a learning styles mentality could limit the depth of this whole thing that we hope learner readiness can actually foster, if that makes sense. Here's another MSLQ, the Motivated Strategies for Learning questionnaire. This is another type of questionnaire that, like learner readiness, it can help learners identify some specific things about themselves and help teachers know, okay, how could I differentiate my coursework based on what I know about my learners? Instead of kind of pigeonholing them with learning styles, I want to discern their readiness to learn, their ability to even identify some of these patterns of self-regulation, or in this case with the MSLQ, I want to discern some of my learners' cognitive elements, their affect, their behavior, their perception of the context, the perception of things that are going on. So learning styles, I think in the end, becomes something that might not have the same depth and foster the same types of, or foster any actually, self-regulation and some of those skills and self-regulation that ultimately can become critical predictors of success in online learning. So what does it mean for our practice? I think we can all agree that learner paradigms are always evolving and different things are kind of coming in and out of favor. So this is what I try to do in my practice. First, recognize confirmation bias. Do I think that teaching to learning styles or teaching to XYZ works because I've already accepted that it does or that it's important? And then recognize my accepted assumptions and maybe challenge those. So instead of just accepting ideas that I hear in my college, for example, or in my department, I want to challenge those, use critical thinking, look for evidence-based practices, and apply what's relevant to your personal context and practice. So I teach French, and some of the things that get discussed in the broader College of Humanities I'm going to use my critical thinking on and say, well, I could just adopt that practice or that mentality or that assumption about learners in the College of Humanities, that there are sometimes assumptions based on our colleges. I try to hone in on evidence-based practices, and especially if it's relevant to my practice in my environment, which maybe just seems obvious. But and then essential characteristics of our learners. Certainly, we need to know if we have learners with disabilities, and we need to ensure, even on the front end of our planning and design, that we're accommodating and following the WCAG guidelines to ensure that our online content is accessible, so that we have transcripts, we have our audio and our video are enabled for screen reading, and our text are enabled for screen reading, or that they're enabled for software and other tools that students with disabilities might use. But then there's also the element of their readiness to learn, their ability to self-regulate. And maybe learning styles really do matter. Dave at Valdosta State is doing his own research in his classroom environment, and he is experimenting with different things. So what happens when he gives a learner readiness survey at the start of the semester, and then he's got other things that he's trying, MSLQ surveys, self-efficacy surveys, etc. And he's trying to identify what of these kind of, it's almost like an intake form, right, at the start of your semester. What of these tools help me understand my learners better and actually help the learners understand themselves and empower them to recognize their abilities and maybe their challenges, or the things that they might need to be more effective learners. And I'm kind of excited about the research he's doing. So with that in mind, I'd love to hear some thoughts from you. Does this just throw everything up in the air for you, or does this kind of align with some of your thinking, and maybe you feel like learner readiness really aligns and supports learning styles, or vice versa? Go ahead and type in the chat. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on these different takes that I've presented today. Okay, Candy, thanks for sharing that. A learner readiness type of survey could be helpful. Other thoughts on this? What I've discovered in using the learner readiness surveys, Carolyn and I have been doing this with BYU Online for a number of years now. What we've discovered is that some students, when they take the learner readiness survey, especially the online learner readiness survey, initially, when we first started doing it, they would self-select out. So then they'd drop the online course. And so we learned that just giving the survey isn't enough. We have a follow-up piece that says, based on how you ranked yourself in the survey, here are some things that you can do to prepare for a successful experience online. So yeah, the NOVA Smarter Measure is a really, I'm familiar with that instrument too. So I think it's a really useful measure. Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, I will share out, Bob, I can send you a link for our online readiness survey. Ours, of course, is tailored to our BYU students in the classes that we offer online here at BYU, but certainly you can adapt that. And I've got here too, this may be valuable, just some of the references that I talked about today. You'll see that at the end here. And if you'd like to reach out to Carolyn and myself directly, here's our email here below. But I think something we've learned too in this whole process, while we've been trying to tackle learning styles and online course design and learner readiness and self-efficacy in an online environment and self-regulation, one of the things we've really learned is that you can't just throw the survey out there and ask them and then not do something about it. So our goal is not to triage out the students who aren't likely to be successful online learners. Our goal is to help them develop the skills and the self-regulation to become successful online learners. Because we do have, pretty robust online coursework available, instead of kind of, oh, you took the survey, now you figured out, I'm probably not going to be successful online. Rather, we'd like them to be able to say, and here's what I can do to become successful. So, and I see, Ellen, you asked just what I was about to talk about. We have developed a prep for online learning. Many of our university students opt not to take it because it's a non-credit course. In our high school environment with all our high school online learners, that is for credit in the high school environment. And in some cases, in some programs, they're required to take it first. So, and yes, I'm happy to share this PowerPoint. And of course, you'll have the recording available too from the conference. Ramona says, I believe learning styles and learner readiness complement each other. Yeah, I appreciate this comment too, like going through your earlier learning years, not even knowing that there were ways you might learn effectively. And learning styles can introduce us to stimulating the mind condition. And then once we have an understanding, we can think outside the box. Yeah, I think there's something really valuable there in what you're saying, Ramona, is that it can help us just realize like, oh, there might be a way I respond to more favorably. We haven't published the study yet. We're kind of in the process of our data analysis, and we're finding some variables that we need to control for. And so we might have to do some more data collection because we found some confounding variables. But the research that we're doing right now that has been really compelling to us anyway is how often what a learner thinks is their learning style actually is the way that they learn the best. So for example, they take a learner readiness survey and they identify, yeah, I feel like I really prefer to learn by listening and watching, and reading just isn't good for me. And then when they're presented with learning modules targeted to that style of learning, and then targeted to a style of learning that they didn't identify as something they prefer or that they think they're good at, so far, and again, our data is a little bit messy and we've got to do some more collection, but some of what we've seen is, in fact, people think they learn well one way, and it's not actually the best way that they learn. So kind of interesting too, just our ability to self-evaluate, and that gets at a whole different research topic. But a lot of interesting things to discover here. And I think in the end, really what we hope we can accomplish as educators is to understand ways that we can position our learners for success. And we want to be able to differentiate according to their needs, but we also want to enable them to grow and adapt and develop skills that they might not currently have. And we want to position them, like I said, for success, to be able to self-regulate and to be able to develop skills that will go beyond their learning styles, essentially. So that's what I've got. Any other questions or comments? Yep. Oops, sorry. Let me pull up the references again. Here you go. And the quiz website should still be, if you scroll up in the chat, you'll see it up there, the educationplanner.org. And you can also just go to educationplanner.org and search learning styles, and it'll pull up that quiz. Ways of reinforcing the readiness skills. Great, Alan, I would love to connect with you via email, and we can talk more about that too. Thanks everyone for your participation today. Let me just go back to the email page so Alan, you can grab my email address there. I'd love to collaborate with you on that.
And good job doing the presentation of two people.
Thank you very much. Well, everyone, I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for your participation today. It's been fun interacting with you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. That was really interesting. Great stuff to walk away with. And thank all of you. We've got one more presentation coming up at the top of the hour to end our first week. Hope to see you there.